Hello, everybody. Welcome. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Is this working? Okay, great. Hello. Welcome to How the Fuck Did We Get Here with authors Sari, Botton, and Liz Prato. This author event is brought to you by Oldster Magazine, and that is a magazine that explores what it means to travel through time in a human body at every phase of life. I am Katie Kosma, your moderator for this evening. I'm an editor at the Rumpus. Hello, welcome. And how great was that video that Liz put together? It just sets the most beautiful tone. Thank you, Liz, for your quick time prowess.
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
I think I found my new calling.
I love how every lyric like correlates to an image. It's just fantastic.
Thanks.
So we are celebrating two books tonight that were written by Gen Xers about Gen X. Both books actually came out on exactly the same day, June 14th of this year, and they both have titles from generation appropriate songs. We will be putting the links to buy their books into the chat, and we'll put these in occasionally throughout the evening as well. And we're going to have an audience Q&A at the end, so feel free to drop questions in there, or if you'd like to do the raise your hand and speak in human voice, you can also do that at the end. And just let us know if there are any technical sound computer issues, please, and thank you. Thank you for your patience if there are. So, in terms of our authors, Sari Botton is the author of the memoir and essays, And You May Find Yourself, Confessions of a Late-Blooming Gen X Weirdo. She's a contributing editor at Catapult and the former essays editor at Longreads. She edited the best-selling anthologies, Goodbye to All That, Writers on Loving and Leaving New York, and Never Can Say Goodbye, Writers on Their Unshakable Love for New York. She teaches creative nonfiction at Catapult, Bay Path University, and Kingston Writer Studio, which is her own little thing that she made, and you should check it out because it's awesome. I shouldn't have said little, it's her own creation. She also publishes Oldster Magazine, which is the sponsor of tonight's event, as I said, Memoir Monday, and Adventures in Journalism. Our second author is Liz Prato. Liz's newest book, Kids in America, A Gen X Reckoning, is from the Santa Fe Writers Project. She is also the author of Volcanoes, Palm Trees, and Privilege, Essays on Hawaii, which was a New York Times top summer read and a finalist for the Oregon Book Award in 2019, as well as Babies on Fire, Stories. She's also the editor of the fiction anthology, The Night and the Rain and the River. Liz's work was named a notable selection in Best American Essays and Best American Sports Writing in 2018, and she has appeared in numerous publications. She is currently the editor-at-large for Forest Avenue Press and is an eternal seeker of aloha. So those are our two highly esteemed authors, and now it's time to actually speak with them and not just hear from me. Sari and Liz, I would love to start with the stellar title of tonight's event. Can you tell us all what the title means to both of you and how it relates to your books?
I'm going to let Liz speak first because she came up with the title.
No. Well, I think for me, it has several different meanings. And one of them is something that we've talked about a lot and both of our books talk about, is that there's this really crooked path to adulthood for us. Whereas I think there were generations before us where, they got out of high school or college and they got a job and they stayed in that job for a very long time, and they got married and they had children, and that was what defined adulthood for them. And my path and Sari's path were definitely way more crooked than that, and still continue to be pretty zigzaggy, I think.
Yes.
So it's not like I just look back and go, oh, that's really easy how I got to this being 55 years old. And then I think another thing for me too is just the realization that so many friends and family members of mine didn't make it here. And so, I remember about 10 years ago, I was talking to a high school friend of mine and we were catching up. We hadn't seen each other in a few years. and we were talking about all the friends of ours who had died or who had gone to jail or, you know, had other things, unfortunate things happen to them. And we asked, why didn't that happen to us? Was it because we were smarter than they were or special in some way? And my friend Victor said, no, it's dumb fucking luck. And I think about that a lot.
For me, there's a similar thing, but different, in that both of my grandmothers died around my age.
Same here.
I'm 56. One died at 51, one died at 55. I've outlived them both. And there's this sense of like, I've made it past the ages of where they died. And how did I? Because I mean, some of the choices I made, like, yeah, how did I survive some of the crazy men I dated? Who were, you know, there was violence, there were crazy, you know, just really bad situations. So yeah, there's a kind of feeling like, okay, how did I get to here? And yeah, I feel like our parents' generation, they went through these changes that they went from being like the parents in Dick and Jane to just throwing out all the rules during the sexual revolution, the feminist revolution, and you know, the women's movement and civil rights, and it was very confusing to us. So that, I think, is what kind of made the path so confusing and also like wayward for us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, it's like, yes, my parents seemed to have that kind of middle class idyllic marriage of the 70s for quite some time, you know, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my brother and I got home from school and she made us a snack, and, you know, she made lunches and dinners and breakfasts and all that stuff. And my dad went to work and he came home at 6 o'clock, you know, all those things. And it turns out they were in a loveless marriage. They did not love each other. They didn't even particularly like each other, I don't think. And then, yeah, so when they got divorced, they did both kind of just like explore themselves in very different ways. And yeah, you know, and I think, Sari, you had a little bit of this in your life too. After you got divorced, after your first marriage, when you got married fairly young, you sort of started exploring yourself and having that, I don't want to call it a second adolescence, but a lot of those same things that people are exploring in their youth, you were exploring them. And I think that's what my parents were doing in like their late 40s and 50s.
Yeah, I was definitely, I would say I was having a belated adolescence,
Okay.
because one of the things that happened to me that I think happened to a lot of Gen X kids whose parents got divorced was that I was parentalized. I was made into an adult at 10, 11. And my initial impulse, weirdly, was to try and improve upon what my parents had failed at. So my parents married very young. My mom was 19, my dad was 25. And then I got married at 23, inexplicably. But I think this is part of that confusion about the paths our parents took, where on the one hand, you know, I wouldn't want to do that. But on the other hand, I was like, no, I'm going to do better than they did. So then when I got divorced at 26, 27, it was suddenly, I was really having my first true adolescence, really, in a way. And I was then, all hell broke loose. I just didn't know how to even be a teenager. I don't know. I was in a very kind of fluid place for a very long time.
Yeah.
But it was very funny watching my parents become what I referred to in those days as disco ducks. Remember that song Disco Duck?
Yes.
Like I watched my parents, and like my dad was a cantor at my synagogue, and my mom was, you know, always in the pews. And all of a sudden they were both like wearing tight jeans and like shiny clothes and
My dad had a white suit,
Oh
a
my
jacket
God.
and pants. And when we would go to Hawaii for vacation, and you know, he'd go to the lounge to dance, he'd wear his white pants with his, you know, shiny shoes and a red aloha shirt and be out there dancing on the dance floor.
Yeah, I remember I once came home from a sleepover where I learned the hustle, and my parents wanted me to teach it to them and my sister. And it was one of those moments, they were kind of like, it was like a last ditch effort to stay together. And they put on the song, the Frankie Valli song, Oh, What a Night, which is like actually kind of dirty. And, you know, I think it's about losing your virginity or something, or some woman losing her virginity. And
Ugh.
and like, I remember dancing with my family to the hustle. I'm like 11 years old. Very
Oh dear
70s
God.
theme. That will be in the movie version of my book.
Oh, we can't hear
We
you.
lost
Oh, we can't hear you, Katie.
Katie, you're muted. Still muted.
Oh my God. Let's see. Can we text her?
Oh
That's-
no.
You can unmute yourself now, Katie.
It wouldn't let me unmute myself, Gail,
Yes.
so I
Oh,
will.
weird.
Sorry about that.
Okay, we got that.
Wow.
Welcome to the big show, folks.
We're committed to
Um,
being messy Gen Xers here, by the way, just so everybody knows. It's part of the plan.
Yes.
It's a punk rock man.
Exactly.
So Liz,
Yes.
Goodreads describes your book as revealing a generation deeply affected by terrorism, racial inequality, rape culture, and mental illness in an era where none of these issues were openly discussed. You examine this through the lens of what was happening to you and your peers when you were in high school. You've got an incredible excerpt to share with us from your essay, Gen X Prep. Would you be down for reading that now?
Yeah, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the little video first, and then I'm going to read as soon as that's over. So Katie will start the video for everyone.
Katie will definitely start the
Katie
video.
knows exactly what she's doing.
Mhm. Okay, here we go. Enter full screen. Okay. This is gonna work.
Screen share?
Is
Clicking that. Yep.
And there's no sound.
no sound.
If I can hear the sound.
We cannot.
What?
There we go.
Oh, there it is.
Double of the cars in the city go rushing by. I sit here alone and I wonder why. Friday night and everyone's home. I can feel the heat, but it's soothing heading down. I search for the beat in this steady town. Tell me on without going. Downtown me on without going. We're the kids in America. We're the kids in America. Everybody
We were privileged. We were mostly white, although a few of us were Black or Hispanic or Asian or Native American. We were old money and new money and not a lot of money, but the majority of us were upper middle class. In movies and TV shows that depicted schools like ours, the kids drove BMWs and Mercedes and Porsches and Corvettes. We didn't drive BMWs and Mercedes and Porsches and Corvettes. We drove brand new Jeeps and Jettas, used VW Rabbits and hand-me-down station wagons. Some of us didn't have cars, so we bummed rides from the ones who did or from our parents. Our school had once been two, the Kent School for Girls and Denver Country Day for boys. In 1974, they went from two schools to one, becoming Kent Denver Country Day. The school's website now says that is when our school became Kent Denver, when Country Day was dropped, but we know differently. Katie CD was on our sweatshirts and notebooks and report cards and diplomas in the 80s. We were Kent Denver Country Day, aristocratic, plutocratic elite for longer than the school admits. We didn't have cheerleaders or prom queens or homecoming kings, and we didn't take shop or auto mechanics or typing or home ec. We took classes that would prepare us for a career in the professions, Shakespeare and French and European history and biology and Yale and Tulane and Brandeis and Duke. We were expected to be lawyers and doctors and architects and bankers and other people who did things with money. We would own and we would sell land, oil, stocks, coaxial cable, uranium. Only a few of us didn't go to college or finish college because we had to work, because we were needed by our families. Those of us who did make it through college graduated into a recession and boomeranged back to our parents' houses and took jobs in coffee shops and clothing stores and gourmet markets and pubs. We tried this career, then that, and then still changed to another. We became employed and unemployed more times than we could count. We are still counting. We were born while young men dying in faraway jungles and young people dying in nearby demonstrations, and our president betraying democracy were shown on nightly TV. We were born into the hope of the moon landing and into the despair of the murders of Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy. We bounced around in the back of station wagons without seatbelts, and we rode bikes without helmets. We had telephones before answering machines and TVs before VCRs and Dewey Decimal before Wikipedia. We watched a lot of TV. We heard new music from the radio and our older siblings and record stores where we flipped through bins and held vinyl in our hands. We watched Prince and George Michael and Michael Jackson and Joe Strummer the first time their videos were on MTV. We celebrated the patriotism of America's bicentennial and the pride of Colorado's centennial, and we watched Kunta Kinte kidnapped and beaten and maimed by Ben Cartwright and Lou Grant and Mr. Brady. We stood in line to watch Star Wars and then The Empire Strikes Back, and we stood in line to watch them again. We spent 444 days praying that 52 American hostages would be safely released from captivity in Iran. We watched the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan and the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II and the successful assassination of John Lennon. We cheered the US men's Olympic hockey team to win the Miracle on Ice against the USSR, underscoring that the Cold War was still very much alive. We played the earliest wave of video games, Pong and Space Invaders, Asteroids and Galaxian. We lived 70 miles from the North American Aerospace Defense Compound and the Cheyenne Mountain Missile Defense Center, with a bunker built to deflect a 30 megaton nuclear explosion. And we were 30 miles from the Rocky Flats nuclear weapons plant. We watched our world turn to nuclear winter on the day after in 1983. We were called latchkey, cynical, lazy, sarcastic, flighty, disaffected, alienated, easily distracted, late-blooming, self-involved, aimless, apathetic, skeptical, pessimistic, self-medicating, impatient, angry, uncommitted, won't grow up, purposeless, unreliable slackers. We are the first generation in modern history to make less money than our parents. We are the last generation to live without fear of being gunned down in school. We are the last generation raised without awareness of neurocognitive disorders and mental illness in children. We are not the last generation to look the other way or be oblivious when those among us sexually assault those among us in parties, but we suspect, we hope, we are the last generation that figured it was okay for male teachers to have sex with the girls. We are the first generation to lose our virginity when sex was linked to a deadly disease, one that our president long refused to name, much less give a shit about. We build new companies and nonprofits and technology. We write about books and we write code and are doctors and teachers and lawyers. We direct plays and make music and TV shows. We manage restaurants and raise families and dance powwow and serve in the Navy. It said we're the last generation raised without the threat of terrorism, but we lost people we loved before 9/11, before Oklahoma City. We lost ourselves to freak accidents and addiction and mental illness and suicide and rare cancers and white supremacy. We ended up in rehab and cults and homeless shelters and bankruptcies and morgues. We are Gen X prep. That's it.
Thank you so much, Liz.
You bet.
One of the things that you mentioned in that excerpt that you bring up again in your book later on, I think is a super poignant point. And if I may, I'm going to just do a quick quote. For better or worse, we'd been conditioned to learn through watching, but we hadn't been taught to act. I'm wondering for both of you how the impact of the constant television, the watching, the learning to watch, how did that affect you? How did that take shape in your book? What does it mean to you, the television culture, MTV, everything?
Sari, go ahead, since I just talked my ass off.
Okay. Well, I feel like to a degree, I was kind of raised by television. I was a latchkey kid, like you mentioned in your piece. My parents were divorcing and I had to get home in time for my little sister and make sure there was a healthy snack. And then we just watched TV and played games. We played Yahtzee. We had the Mary Hartman game, which somebody gave my mom as a gift, as like a joke, and we played it. But we watched TV. We did our homework in front of the TV. Yeah. It was our company. We watched everything like I Dream of Jeannie, Beat the Clock, Match Game. We watched game shows, and then Brady Bunch, Partridge Family, one after the other. All the things in your videos, by the way, you make great videos. One after the other. And then late at night, I would beg my mother to let me stay up and watch Mary Hartman with her. And when I was 12, I was Mary Hartman for Halloween, by the way. Everybody thought I was Dorothy. But yeah, I mean, TV really raised me. You know, one of your pieces, Liz, you talk about things that you watched on the screen about consent or lack thereof. And witnessing, and I think I was informed about how to perform femininity and how to have relationships with men in a very dysfunctional way from television and movies. And yeah, that piece of yours where you talk about the messages that you got, that we all absorbed about how women didn't need to consent. They could be raped and then fall in love with their rapists like Luke and Laura. That blew my mind, that piece of yours.
Oh yeah, thanks. And you know, for me, the Luke and Laura thing has kind of been out there for a while. But when I really started looking at other movies and TV shows too, and seeing how incredibly common that was, it was just appalling. I mean, even just the other day, I was watching a Grease marathon that was on because of Olivia Newton-John dying. And just in that great Summer Loving piece, there's one of the things where the Jeff Conway character says, "Did she put up a fight?" And, you know, like Michael and I looked at each other like, you mean like rape? You know, I mean, it's just, it was so a part of everything. That's what it was. That was the primary message, that women didn't have autonomy over their own bodies and they didn't have agency over the word no. And it's shocking when you look back at it. And it also explains a lot. I mean, not in a very reassuring way necessarily, but you're like, oh, okay, that helps me like kind of unpack a lot of other aspects of my life and the culture when I see that.
You know, I've always thought a lot about, I love show tunes. I'm a theater geek. And for years, I've thought about the messages in some of the show tunes and plays that I grew up with. And I've been like, what? And I hadn't realized it was still so prevalent. You know, like there's in Fiddler on the Roof, there's the Matchmaker song that everybody loves. Oh, Matchmaker, very sweet song. There's a line, you've heard he has a temper, he'll beat you every night, but only when he's sober, so you're all right. And like just all these songs, but then when I read that piece in your book and realized how prevalent those viewpoints were, not only in the theater from the 40s and 50s, but also like in the television we were being raised on. Yeah.
Well, one thing that I found out pretty recently is I was rewatching My So-Called Life, and actually Jordan Catalano sexually assaults Angela. The first,
Wow.
yeah. And she pushes him off and she says no when he's on her, and she says, no, you know, and he tells her she's very immature.
Wow.
As a result of that. And that was My So-Called Life, which I think we considered to be a little bit more mature and
progressive.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the concept that y'all are talking about with consent, I think, is another aspect that crosses through both of your books in terms of how our culture, how the masculine aspect of our culture controls women's bodies. Sari, you even have a whole chapter outlining your journey through the world wherein you've breathed this in all your life, and how it impacted you, and how you then treated your body because of all the messages you were getting. I love how you even break the fourth wall and you ask your readers, how old were you when you learned to hate your body? So I feel like it's all intertwined, the controlling women's bodies, not asking for consent, objectifying. Women's bodies were shown to us that they are comestible, they are digestible by men, no matter our wishes.
Yeah, one of the things I talk about in that chapter called The Weight, a Manifesto, is about not only my own eating disorder, but our culture's eating disorder and our culture's body dysmorphia. And I have this whole litany of all the things that I hate. I wrote hated, but I still currently actively hate them, including like I am most visible to men when there is the least of me. And this is, I think that this thinness culture really came about when we were children. You know, I think that in the 60s, mid to late 60s, that's when people, diet doctors started using amphetamines. Twiggy was the model du jour. And this, you know, and also people started using cocaine in Hollywood and in the fashion industry. And suddenly everyone looked like skeletons. You know, you didn't really have that in the 40s, 50s, but the 60s and 70s, that image of like a woman is supposed to look like nothing but a coat hanger, you know, hanging with clothes hanging off her, that informed my sense of what I was supposed to look like, which is also actually what I've come to realize, a form of white supremacy. The tall, thin, flat-chested woman is a wasp, and also it's misogynist because they only want the women who look like boys, who can pass as boys. And so there's this white supremacist, sexist version of women that we're all supposed to aspire to, whether or not our bodies are meant to do that. So I'm still unlearning everything I've been told about how I'm supposed to look, how I'm supposed to treat my body. How many of the people, when I had an eating disorder, an active eating disorder in my teens and early 20s, how many of the adults around me were doing crazy batshit things with food, you know, the disordered eating. You know, they were on the Cambridge diet, which was basically just like powdered food, or they were on liquid aminos or Atkins. They were doing extreme things, only they weren't considered. I was the one with the eating disorder, but they were, you know, they were eating food with the nutritional value of a Tic Tac, you know, all day, slim fast. And people in my family got injected with pregnant women's urine because the human chorionic gonadotropin and whatever it's called, HCG, it raises your metabolism. Like, I was just, but I think our whole culture was telling us to be skinny and as women, to be skinny and to, look a certain way and not take up much space is really what it was about, I think.
Just as you were talking, Sari, you were saying you're still trying to unlearn that. And I was thinking about, I had an event on Tuesday night, and I've actually gained a fair amount of weight since my first event a couple of months ago, or at least to me, it feels like it. And so I feel like I don't look as good, and therefore feel like I'm not going to present as well in some way. And I had just I can't even tell you what my bedroom looked like, throwing all the clothes around, trying to find the thing that didn't make me look fat. And so I was thinking that in my head. And then I was thinking, then I get down on myself for that. Shouldn't I know better? I'm a feminist. Shouldn't,
Yeah.
why should 5 pounds matter to me so much? And it's just this horrible cycle.
I write about that in that chapter also, how I can't win. I'm ashamed of having an eating disorder. I'm ashamed of my shame. It's so layered, but it is so prevalent in the culture. I also reference this joke that I used to make. Well, it wasn't my joke. It was from Rhoda, from the show Rhoda. And Rhoda Morgenstern, in one episode, there's something she eats that's fattening, and she says, I don't know why I'm eating this instead of just scotch taping it to my hips or something like that. And for a long time, if I would eat a dessert in front of people, or I would eat some cheesy nachos or whatever, I would make that joke. And it hurts my feelings to think that I would do that to myself in those days, but I was just mimicking what I was taught. But that kind of thinking it is still very prevalent. But thankfully now we have things like Michael Hobbs's podcast Maintenance Phase, and Virginia Soul Smith's Substack newsletter.
I don't know about that. What is that?
It's called Burnt Toast, and it's really more about feeding kids and not giving kids an eating disorder.
That's nice, yeah.
But honestly, I am still in many ways that kid, and so I think about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, Sari, that's a perfect seg. Thank you. We didn't plan that. You as a kid, something that is a concept in both of your books, but Sari, you go into great exquisite detail talking about your own experience as a latchkey kid. And I know in Liz's excerpt, she mentioned we were called the latchkey kids. And so, Sari, I was wondering, you have an excerpt prepared for us, correct?
That is correct.
Awesome. I know that you developed an acute and very specific fear of becoming what you called a child of divorce, and how much panic and then the ensuing activity, the kinetic factor of trying to undo that. And I was wondering if you could read from your essay, Leaving the Land of Make-Believe.
Yes, I shall do that. Okay. In June of 1976, at the end of 6th grade, my parents split up. I'd been worried about this happening, not only because I sensed my parents' unhappiness, but also because there was a whole divorce boom occurring around us. Families were dropping like flies in our suburban Long Island community. I would stay up at night and pray to God that my parents wouldn't split up like so many other kids' parents had, that I wouldn't become one of those bedraggled divorce kids who always seemed a mess emotionally and physically. Divorce stretched parents' finances as they forked over tens of thousands of dollars to lawyers and now had to pay for 2 households instead of just 1. That left less money for new clothes and haircuts for the children. Some of the kids in my midst, whose moms and dads had separated or divorced, came to school looking completely disheveled, with scuffed shoes and floods, pants they'd outgrown, and messy hair. They were exhausted emotionally and physically from being dragged back and forth between 2 different homes. Sometimes they didn't have their homework because they'd left it or their textbooks at the wrong house. It was the saddest thing, and I was desperate for it to not happen to my family. I became anxious and hypervigilant. For a Thanksgiving-themed essay assignment in my 6th grade class, I wrote about how much I loved my family and hoped nothing would happen to it. Before bed, I bargained some more with God, promising I'd be extra good if my family could stay together. Obviously, it didn't work. I became fractured and insecure. I stopped having any idea who I was and started studying others for clues as to how I should be. Who was I? Who was I supposed to be? After all, I could be anyone I wanted, according to Free to Be You and Me. For the uninitiated, when it was released in November 1972, Free to Be was a groundbreaking recording of stories and songs about gender and racial equality and bridging the generation gap between Gen X kids and their parents and grandparents. It was produced by actress Marlo Thomas with funding from the Ms. Foundation and featured now iconic performances by Diana Ross, Alan Alda, Mel Brooks, Harry Belafonte, Roberta Flack, Carol Channing, Dick Cavett, Rosie Greer, Chris Jackson, Thomas herself, and others. Free to Be was a rich compendium of liberal-minded allegories that strongly influenced me and informed my understanding of how the world worked, or how it should work. The story of the independent thinking Princess Atalanta let me know that girls didn't have to marry men they didn't love or marry at all, a message I seem to have ignored in my 20s. Songs like William's Doll and It's All Right to Cry told me it was okay for boys to be sensitive. Parents or people told me that mommies and daddies can be anything they want to be, regardless of gender. The poem Housework made it clear that housework was everyone's job and not just women's. One particular line in When We Grow Up, a song ostensibly about disregarding norms for masculine and feminine attractiveness, made the greatest impression upon me. When I grow up, I'm gonna be happy and do what I like to do. When I grow up, I'm gonna be happy and do what I like to do. The whole record made a strong impression on me, but that one line gave me the notion that adulthood was going to be awesome. I would get to be whoever I wanted to be, do whatever I wanted to do, whenever I wanted to do it. My parents bought the record for me and my sister on a family outing to the Sunrise Mall. I took to it instantly, playing it day after day, singing along to its jangly, upbeat, soft rock, absorbing its empowering messages. On All in the Family, I observed Archie Bunker razzing his neighbor Maud and his daughter Gloria about women's lib. And right there on this record was confirmation that Archie was a retrograde jerk and that Maud and Gloria were doing the right thing, standing up to him. Things were changing. I ate up this utopian vision of the world. Even at that young age, I somehow knew it was revolutionary, different from the more constrained world my mother and grandmother had been raised in. I knew it had something to do with changes I was witnessing in my mother. It was all somehow related to my mom starting to go back to work as a teacher for the first time since I was born, initially as a substitute, then as a teacher with her own classroom. After the job came my mother's own car, a tan 72 Dodge Dart. A few years later came her new modern haircut. She returned home one day with her long locks cut off into a pixie, and instantly I cried. I was turning 11, and suddenly my mother no longer looked the way I had known her to look. At 36, she was evolving so rapidly in so many ways that I found it difficult to recognize her. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. I'm curious for first Sari, since you just talked about it, did your mom talk to you or around you about certain tenets of feminism, or was it just in her actions that you saw this new trajectory and momentum?
She had some group of women that started coming over. I guess it must have been like a consciousness raising group.
Right.
And then she started speaking up in ways she never had before. And my dad called it women's lib and kind of dismissed it at the time. So she was starting to talk, but she wasn't really talking in theoretical terms. It wasn't like, very conceptual or anything, but I just noticed that suddenly she was not willing to do certain things. She wanted her space. She wanted time to herself. She sent us to Florida for a school break with my dad and didn't come this time. Like it was really more something I was just witnessing in her.
Right. I was wondering if you were brought in on the conversation or if it felt like you were sort of pushed out of it while the me generation was happening next to you.
I think I was just stunned and like watching it, like what the hell, who are these people? Who are these disco ducks?
Mhm.
That's really, I think of that song when I think of my parents, suddenly wearing like designer jeans and polyester shiny things and going to discotheques.
I had a really different experience of the way my mom came into feminism and brought me into it. The last year my parents were married, my mom decided to go to college, and she's someone who, when she graduated from high school, her family, she was working class poor and she didn't have money to go to college. And it wasn't a thing anyone had ever done. And so she did what a lot of single women did back then. She went to work for the phone company. And it was there that someone introduced her to my dad, and then they got married and she was a stay-at-home mom, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, like I said, the last year my parents were married, she went to college. My parents got divorced, and that became what she did. That being a student was her job at that point. And she got so into feminism. It was awesome. We had all these feminist teachers. And so they were looking at feminist theories, but through all these different lenses, through religion and through literature and all these different places. And she had this great group of friends, both a combination of non-traditional age students and traditional age, and a professor, one of their professors actually, and they would come over and sit around the kitchen table and rap. And they loved having me there. That was part of the great thing about them, is being able to pass feminism down to this next generation. And and I loved it. I sat there and listened to all of it. And, I think it was 1982 when the ERA was defeated. That was the first time I ever went to a protest. My mom, we all went down to a protest in downtown Denver about that. And so my indoctrination, if you want to call that, into feminism was really early, and it was very, very welcoming too. And I felt very much a part of it as opposed to being on the outside of it. Now, in my, this was like in the early 80s, which was a very conservative time. So it's not like this is what the mainstream was doing. And it's certainly not what kids in my high school were thinking and doing and mirroring in their parents too. So it's not like it's something that made me really popular or something like that. I did have a small group of friends that were more liberal, but the majority of the school was very conservative. So, it was kind of weird for me to be a feminist.
That's so cool though, that you were exposed in that way. Like, I feel like I had to come to it myself later. I was getting clues from my mom, but I don't think she had fully embraced it either, or fully immersed herself. So that is very cool that you had that.
Yeah, I feel very lucky. Yeah.
Well, so I'm curious if anyone in our audience has any questions for the author. I haven't seen any come in on chat.
I saw one come in. Someone wanted to know where in Long Island Sari is from. It's not like, make or break our lives question, but it's there.
I'll give you the answer.
Yeah.
So I was born in Long Beach, New York, and then I bounced around between Island Park, Oceanside, and Long Beach again, for most of my childhood and then young adulthood, and so I'm from that little area.
There's a great question here. Would love to hear you reflect on the role of nostalgia in the Gen X experience. And this is something I've thought about a lot, because our nostalgia was really branded, from like Fisher Price toys and McDonald's meals, like the little characters that first accompanied them, like Grimace and, the Hamburglar and stuff like that. And, things like the cartoons we watched suddenly got put on, products. And what was the other thing I was just thinking about? Oh, and breakfast cereals too, the characters that represented them. So our nostalgia got branded from a very early age. And then of course, coming up to the ultimate branding of MTV, where musicians and musical acts were branded. Madonna was a brand, Michael Jackson was a brand. So I think it puts I think it imprints on us in a different way than just hanging out in the soda shop kind of nostalgia does for people. Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, I worked at MTV News for a
Oh,
while.
that's so cool.
I wrote the news for Tabitha Soren and Kurt Loder.
You are awesome.
But the thing is, I had no idea what I was writing about most of the time. I had to like do LexisNexis searches to figure it all out, because I was like really a musical theater geek and not like a rocker. But something I don't know if you feel this way, but I am tremendously nostalgic for my childhood. But I'm nostalgic for times when I was really sad and like really hard times. And but I like when I hear Free to Be You and Me, by the time I get to the end of the record, I'm in tears. I cry through these, but I don't want to get away from them. And I think there's something about nostalgia. I think you hold on to whatever hope you held at that time, that things would be different. And I think that is what that's my theory of like why we become attached to the representations of a time that we might not have been happy. Because I was so sad. I also had fun, and all those afternoons playing board games with my friends while watching TV. There were some fun moments, but I'm very nostalgic for the brands, for the Danskin outfits, for color forms, all that stuff that is from a time when I was having a really hard time.
That's so interesting. So after my brother died in 2011, he was 45 years old. And after he died and I cleaned out our family home that he had been living in, I became intensely nostalgic. And part of that is because I was finding bits and pieces of my childhood, but I was even like going on to Etsy and eBay and buying more stuff. I was buying the pieces of my past before everything had gone to shit. It was before my parents got divorced, before I knew they were in a loveless marriage, and certainly well before I understood that there was mental illness ravaging our family, and before I could have even ever in a million years have guessed that by age 44, my mom, dad, and brother would all be dead. So I think I was just buying that innocence and the hopeful, but it didn't work that way for me. It didn't make me feel better because it made me so aware of the chasm between those two realities.
Yeah, that's interesting. But that you were reaching back for that time.
Yeah, reaching back.
Yeah.
So we've got one question. Do either of you or both of you have thoughts on what turned Gen X moms into helicopter parents?
Neither of us are parents, so I don't know if you should
That's
ask.
interesting.
Sari, do you have
I will say,
anything?
though, there's someone in my life who is a complete helicopter parent, not mentioning any names. And I think that I know that she is overcompensating for the kind of parenting that happened in our generation. I think that she is like really trying to make sure that these kids are given everything they need to launch them to a good adulthood. I don't feel like my parents set me up for a good adulthood in any way. I also have great compassion for them. I don't think, they entered marriage. My mother was 19 when she got married. He was 25. They had they hadn't come to those consciousness raising years yet. They had no idea what they were children themselves. Their frontal lobes hadn't completed developing, So I think that those parents didn't know what they were doing. And so now there are Gen X parents who are like, all right, I'm putting some thought into this, and they go a little overboard.
That makes a ton of sense. I have a friend who, two friends, and their kids were always super scheduled all through the summer. And I was not a very scheduled kid in the summer. I went to a camp for a while, but when I wasn't at camp, I just had my own time and watched General Hospital and other shitty things that fucked me up. But anyway, I was asking them a few years ago, like why they did this, why they scheduled their kids. And one of them said that he remembered when he was a kid in the summers, his mom was working or his dad, who was an alcoholic, was at the bar, and he was so bored and and I think neglected is probably was the undercurrent that he felt there, that like, and he just didn't want his kids to be bored like that. I mean, he said bored, and I think it's more than that. Maybe I'm reaching into it, but yeah, he was definitely trying to make up for what his parents didn't provide for him or what he had wanted. And that's one of the things I think parents do. I'm not a parent, but I think parents often give their kids what they themselves would have wanted as a child, not necessarily knowing for a fact what their kids want. That's just parenting.
Yeah.
Right.
And who the hell knows what the kids want? Because the kids don't know what they want because they're new in the world and they don't know what there is to have.
Yeah.
Here's a great question. When you observe the generations that followed us, millennials, Y, Z, etc., what, if anything, do you see as Gen X's legacy?
I think that's an important question. And I think also it's important for Gen X to acknowledge the generations that came before us and their legacy. I'm hugely grateful actually to the baby boomers. I know they get a lot of shit, but they actually broke a lot of barriers down. And they were the ones who were just made the civil rights movement and feminism and the gay rights movements and all those things possible, and did a ton of that. And I think also then by turn, Gen X, the thing we did was do things a little differently and be okay with it, and take a more circuitous path, getting to where we want to go and not being, being able to make choices. And one of the things people love and are annoyed by about millennials and Gen Z is how many they make these really specific choices for themselves. And then, just, okay, this is what I need for myself. And these are actually some pretty awesome things. And I think one of the things we see with those age groups, especially the younger ones, they're going into workplaces and they're saying, here's what I won't tolerate in terms of sexism, in terms of ableism, in terms of racism, of these things. And they mean it. Like if you don't like get your shit together, they'll like write a letter to the editor or something and the whole thing blows up. But it's kind of awesome too. I am like so excited and proud of and happy what's happening with the generation who's doing that, who was parented by Gen X. And that's pretty cool.
I think that is cool. I think another one of our legacies is authenticity. I think that we care so much. Like we wanted to look behind everything. We when we first came into the world, our parents were in that Dick and Jane, kind of very formal mode. And we were like, what is that? What's the real thing behind it? And I feel, and then we saw the real thing behind it. So we're always poking behind things. No, what's the real? And we are very obsessed with being real and genuine. And it makes us, even if we're messy, and often we're messy. And so we embrace messiness in a way that I don't think maybe the boomers a little bit. And I'm grateful to them too. I also like younger people. I like the younger generations. I don't like all this discourse that's about like fighting, the generation.
It's so unnecessary.
I'm not into that. But I do think that like messy authenticity is our hallmark.
Well, that leads us to, and I'm so sorry, I think we do not have time for more audience questions. I'm really sorry, everybody. But Sari, when you were just talking about authenticity, it made me think of, you sort of thought, everybody before us thought we have to put on this suit of adulthood. And then we act like adults for the rest of our lives. And since this is an Oldster magazine, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the magazine, you've got to subscribe. Sari puts out to writers, thinkers, artists a questionnaire asking how old they feel. And so I would love to ask both of you to end the night on what age do you truly feel like when you look inside yourself, and do you feel like an adult?
I'm going to let you answer first, Liz.
I didn't used to feel like an adult. And I thought that was because I didn't have kids or because I had non-traditional careers and things like that. But then I would talk to my friends who did have traditional careers, like important ones and children. And they're like, no, I still feel like I'm 27 or, whatever the age was. So I think that's really fascinating. And I think, again, we get to redefine what it means to be our age. This is what 55 looks like. you know what? And I act young sometimes, whatever that means. And I laugh and I make mistakes and I like to change the color of my hair and I get tattoos. And I'm also responsible and I've buried family members and all those things that come along with it. So I just am now redefining. This is 55.
Mm. I feel 56, which I am. And I also feel there's a part of the 11-year-old is always alive in me. Sometimes when I reflect, when I think of myself, I think of her. I think that's an age where my life changed very dramatically. I mean, there's also like an inner 36-year-old, there's an inner, you know, there are places, there are junctures in my life where I default to, but that 11-year-old lives in me very much. Life changed and she became hyper vigilant, and also she stopped being fully authentic. So right before that change, that version of me is always there.
Right. Well, you two, thank you so much for sharing your evenings with us, and thank you to our wonderful audience for coming to your computers and joining us. We've put in the links, and maybe if we could put in the links just one last time for the book purchases as well as subscribing. Thank you, Michael. Thank you all so much. Everybody go get the books if you haven't already. And yeah.
And I would like to say thank you to Katie Kosma and Liz Prato and Michael Keith. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm sorry I didn't get to respond to you in the chat. I can't like talk and chat at the same time, but I keep seeing, and I'm so grateful you're all here. Somebody shares a birthday with me, all this nice stuff. But anyway, I and Oldster Magazine, thank you all. And thank you, Liz, Michael, and
Thank you for hosting
Katie.
it. Also, we're on Twitter, so continue conversations with us on there.
Yes.
I'm sorry,
yes.
I just said that, but I did.
You know, social media is a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
And I'm on there a lot. So thank you all. And yes, please buy our books. Sign up for subscriptions to Oldster Magazine, oldster.substack.com. There's going to be some great new stuff coming. And yeah. And,
Okay.
and shall we outro with our...
We're going to outro now with the video we started with. So in case you missed the whole thing.
So
Right.
thank you all.
Kitty's like, oh crap, I have to do this again.
I got it. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. I think you have to share your screen.
I did it. Oh,
It's okay.
There we go.
wow. Oh, wow.
Oh, I adore you. You're so great.
Same
Yay.
All right, everybody. Thank
Good
you
night.
so much.
Michael, do you
all
want to
been
stop the
wonderful.
recording?